Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Deadpool in anticipation of the third installment of the series coming out later this summer. So we are excited to dive in. We're doing our homework, Sarah. We are good students, preparing for what's to come.
Yeah. Gotta get a refresher on all the Deadpool universe.
This is what Marvel does, just constantly assigning out homework for all of us. Or maybe more for people like me that don't keep up with all of the movies all of the time. Okay, let's start off with the IMDb summary for Deadpool. Sarah, take it away.
A wisecracking mercenary gets experimented on and becomes immortal, yet hideously scarred, and sets out to track down the man who ruined his looks.
All right. So let's start off in Movies and Us tradition with our one-sentence summaries for Deadpool. Sarah, what is yours?
A pop culture scavenger hunt disguised as a romance, disguised as a superhero movie.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Did you think this was a love story? So good. Okay. My one-sentence summary is Francis is giving Waldo a run for his money.
Amazing. And he was, honestly.
He really was.
Francis was doing some work in this.
The amount of times Ryan Reynolds is like, where's Francis? Where's Francis? Where's Francis? Okay. Let's dive in with our thoughts about Deadpool. And I suppose that since it came out in 2016, we can do a short, brief, high-level review of the film with our thoughts, and then we'll give a spoiler and then dive right in. So, Sarah, let me hear your thoughts about Deadpool. And perhaps, had you seen this before? Have you seen it recently? What's your history with Deadpool as a franchise in general?
Yeah, I remember when this came out in 2016, and I had a bunch of friends go see it, and they were like, oh my gosh, it's so good, and all of this. And of course, I had to be that person that was like, oh, everybody likes this, I'm not going to watch it. I don't know why I do that, but that is what I did. And so I didn't watch Deadpool until I think 2020. I think this was a pandemic watch for me.
Wow, nice.
And so I've seen it before, but it's been a few years. So I had kind of forgotten about Vanessa, who is a major plot point in this movie.
Yeah, that whole plot line.
yeah, she's kind of the whole point. But this movie is fun. It's silly. It's irreverent. It's super violent in its action. And for some reason, that's just a really fun time for me. And I think upon second watch, I was really impressed with how it's structured and how, it cuts back in time a bunch, especially in the beginning, which will normally annoy me. But I think in this movie, it's really effective in not only showing us what happened in the past, but in showing us who Deadpool is. And then just really impressed at all of these little things that the movie does to keep this almost frenetic or propulsive pace and this real sense of momentum that I feel like this movie has. So in addition to being fun and silly, it's also doing some really intelligent things. I think from a story perspective, it's not doing anything revolutionary, but it doesn't have to. So yeah, I had a great time, and I enjoyed all of the little Easter eggs and pop culture references just littered about. That's always fun for me to just collect those in my little bucket while watching.
Yes, yeah. So one of my thoughts throughout watching this film is I thought I had seen this movie, but maybe I haven't seen this movie. And maybe what I'm remembering seeing is Deadpool 2, or I might have seen this movie and I just have totally forgotten the entire plot line. So there's a lot of bits of this movie that I don't remember being as dark, and I'm intrigued to watch Deadpool 2 next as we do our homework assignment, just to see how these two movies are in tone and nature together. I saw Deadpool 2 in a theater, and I remember it was an amazing time, and there was a lot of self-aware, like winking jokes throughout about like the industry in general and Ryan Reynolds as an actor and all this kind of stuff that I think we get bits and pieces of in this first movie. But I'm intrigued. Like, I feel like there's a lot more of that in the second movie. So my memory of this movie was like very, very hazy. So for all intents and purposes, this was the first time that I've like really experienced this movie, and there's a lot that is a lot more intense, a lot more violent, a lot more dark than I remembered it being. I think maybe because this character is so silly and goofy in his own way for as part of his brand, and so some of the like darker stuff I was kind of shocked by, honestly. It makes for some really interesting like character moments. We I mean, not for all intents and purposes, I think this is kind of the origin story for Deadpool as a character. And I think there's some like interesting things and choices that they make on that front. So I was surprised by those bits. Overall, it's a really good time. This is like breaking out of the mold of I think a lot of the Marvel movies around this time that were a lot more family friendly and played to a wider audience. And so it just would have been neat to have remembered what the experience was in the conversations around this movie in 2016. I was not following Marvel at all then. I was still in my rebellious, I will not watch any of the superhero movies phase in 2016. So I just did this is something fresh and different and exciting, and that's always a really good time.
Yeah, and that's what I remember the conversation being, because this came out in 2016, which was kind of in like the middle of the rise of the
Mm-hmm.
MCU, and it was so refreshing. Like I remember my friends talking about it and being like, "Oh my gosh, it was so cool to see a different type of superhero," and
Mm-hmm.
I'm so impressed at how Deadpool is able to almost straddle being a superhero movie. And so there's like a lightheartedness, there's a goofiness, at times there's even like a hopefulness to it, and like a really like dark, gritty anti-hero story with all of the violence and all of these like dark
Mm-hmm.
themes and things. And it has both in it. And I think that that's a really hard line to toe. And Deadpool manages to have both of those elements coexisting in this film without it feeling too like overwhelming or disjointed. So I'm just really impressed at how these very seemingly disparate themes and styles
Mm.
of film are able to coexist in this one movie so well together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it straddles a lot of those tones really well. This really could have easily been a hodgepodge of things that felt like they were incoherent, but somehow they were able to string them together in a really interesting way. Um, okay, well, let's include a spoiler here. Deadpool 2016 film, the first installment in the series. We are going to spoil the rest of the movie. If you haven't seen it yet, we recommend checking it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. Okay, where shall we dive in first? What's an aspect of this film on this watch that maybe really stood out to you? You found yourself mulling on throughout the film or afterwards.
Yeah, I think one of the big things for me is just the structure. And I mentioned it a little bit, but uh, it it's this, especially in the beginning, kind of constant flashback and then like flashback to the present. And then we flash back to a different time. And we're just constantly kind of time jumping in the beginning. And I thought that that was really brilliant for a couple of different reasons. Like that movement in the story really helps control the tone and helps space
Mm-hmm.
out and give us time in between these really dark moments to like breathe, and then we come back up and it's joking, laughing, irreverent humor while people's heads are being chopped off and all of that, and then we like dive deep back down into this like emotionally heartbreaking moment. But it also works because it's almost like this insight into who Deadpool is and almost like how his mind works. And it feels like you're following his train of thought, almost like he has like big ADHD and is just like, okay, we're going to talk about this. And then, oh, I got distracted. Let's talk about this. Oh, and then we're going to go here. And so I think it's really, really smart on multiple levels because we get to see the like what of his past, and we get to see the events
Hmm.
that happened to him to make him this way, but we can also get an insight into his world and how he sees the world and how he processes information with how all of that is structured. And I thought that that was just a really cool way to introduce us to this character.
Yeah, yeah. The structure is one that I think like typically doesn't usually work in a film to do the flashback sequences, but like you mentioned, for some reason it really does work in this movie. And I think a big part of that is because we are so connected to this character that you're right, it feels like we're inside of his mind and just getting to see his train of thought as he's introducing us to his own story. So kind of to build on that train of thought that you were going down, the use of like um, Deadpool talking directly to the camera is something that I remember so distinctly from watching Deadpool 2. And it's like stood out to me in my mind around, I mean, some of the funniest moments are when he's talking directly to us as the audience. But I think also it adds this really interesting like breaking of a new dimension where they have like a wider playground to play in and to crack their jokes in and to be roasting himself as he's telling this story, or to be roasting the industry or him as an actor, like Ryan Reynolds as an actor. I think all of that adds a whole strand that they get to weave into the rest of this movie that's really, really fun. So it reminded me a lot of The Emperor's New Groove and the way that Cusco would do that same thing of like, here's where I am right now in the midst of some big like moment of drama and action. But hold on, let's rewind it back, and we get to see him pause the screen and like draw on the screen and offer his little commentary. And so that breaking of this other like dimension, kind of breaking the rules of the way that movies work, which is that the characters never look directly into the camera because we are the third party observer in their world, and this movie chooses to break that and has a lot of fun with it. I think it's also fitting for who this character is as a person, being irreverent and rebellious and doing things that are outside of the box. I think that that's a really great fit for who this character is as well. So I feel like the movie really reflects that aspect of the character, but also I think it just gives them a whole new pasture of land to be able to play in with all of the humorous bits of this movie too.
Yeah, I love the fourth wall break in the middle of a fourth wall break. Like that was really,
Yeah.
it's those little moments that are so funny. And I think the other thing that impressed me about this was how the movie handles Ryan Reynolds. Like I don't know about you, but for
Mhm.
me, like I can only handle so much of him until like I just start to get bored and I'm like, okay, I'm done. And I didn't feel that in this, even though
Hmm.
it's very Ryan Reynolds, it's very his type of humor. But I think because it's woven through all of these other layers too, like we get to see these dramatic moments and we get to see these serious moments and we get to see these actiony moments, and sure his humor is woven throughout, but for me it never felt like too much. And then none of the jokes or the bits I feel like went on for too long, because I feel like sometimes
Mm.
that happens where a joke just keeps going and you're like, okay, that stopped being funny like a couple times ago, can we stop and can we move to the next thing?
Mm.
And I think because this movie is so fast paced and his dialogue is so fast paced, there's not that time to get stuck in a joke or have a bit go on for too long
Mm.
because we have to go to the next thing. And I think that rapid dialogue, the rapid action, that constant movement helps to make this movie state like maybe more focused. And so
Mm.
it makes it even more enjoyable to get through, and you feel the even greater stakes and tension because there's just this like rapid dialogue, rapid onslaught of information or pop culture references or whatever it is, and that really helps keep that forward momentum going no matter what part of the movie we're in.
Mhm, mhm. And I think another bit that works well to keep it fresh is that we get to see him interacting with other characters and they have their banter back and forth. So like his friend that owns the bar. You know what I mean? There's like a lot of comedic bits that are delivered not just by him, which I think also helps a lot. One thing that I think is a classically like Marvel is its sense of humor and the way that it like tees up a joke and then delivers the joke, and we don't get that type of pacing in this movie because the whole thing is just one big stream of consciousness of Ryan Reynolds' character's thought processes and his internal dialogue as he's like navigating this really difficult situation, which I think makes it work better. I think sometimes the way that Marvel will handle humor in its movies and kind of vacillate between being like really sentimental and then in the middle of a really sentimental moment we're going to tee up something funny. Just it gets a little, it's a little bit vanilla, and I think it gets a little bit stale sometimes, and I think this one is a totally different flavor of humor, and the tone and the intensity of it basically doesn't let up for the entire 2 hour experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Deadpool so fun to watch. You know, even years later, after we've
Mm-hmm.
seen a bunch of other superhero movies, a bunch of anti-hero movies, we've also seen other like irreverent shows and movies like this. Like, but Deadpool continues to be so fun, and I think that's something that I really appreciated watching it again. I had just watched Madam Web, which is a
Oh
terrible
yeah.
movie. It's so bad. But it was like that curiosity of like, I know it's going to
Mm.
be bad. I have to see how bad it is. And while I was watching Madam Web, Madame Web, I don't know, whatever, that movie, um, I was just so struck by how lifeless it felt. Like there wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
spark to
Yeah.
it, there wasn't a creativity to it, there wasn't any fun in it. And I feel like there was a time in the MCU, and then obviously Deadpool fits this bill too, where there is just this creativity and there's this excitement and there's this movement, and like you just want to watch this movie. And even if you're not a superhero movie person, it just kind of ignites your imagination a little bit. and
Mm-hmm.
and Deadpool has that. Obviously, like it's very violent, it's very gory, all of that, but it's so creative and it's so fun and it's so imaginative, and it has that spark that some of the especially earlier MCU movies had. But I feel like
Mm-hmm.
more and more superhero movies are losing some of that, and so it was just nice to watch Deadpool, which has that after
After, yeah.
watching like a very boring, lifeless superhero movie.
What do you think, not to go on a little bit of a tangent, but we're going to go on a little bit of a tangent. What do you think, especially after watching those two movies back to back, what do you think is some of those ingredients that may have been missing that you feel like Deadpool really landed? Because I think that's a fascinating like contrast that you experienced both so close to each other and could see and palpably feel the difference between those two movies, which arguably are both superhero movies created by a similar studio, you know what I mean? But what what do you feel like was missing behind the heart of those two movies, or lack of heart in the other movie?
Yeah. I think there's like a lot of things, obviously. Like Deadpool and
Yeah.
Madam Web are very different movies and they're very different characters, so they're gonna take on
Yeah.
different personalities. But Madam Web especially, I think some of the superhero movies of late, maybe the Sony live action superhero movies of late,
Yeah.
have more fallen into like a formula. It's almost like, oh,
Mm.
this used to work. You know, superhero movies used to draw a big crowd, so let's just make one
Keep doing it.
of
Mm.
a superhero movie or of a superhero nobody's ever heard of and hope that it's good. And that's just not what has happened. And I think just being cursed with a bunch of rewrites, studio involvement, you know, like all of these different things, probably not enough money, or you know, problems in production and post-production, all of that like really like plagued Madam Web, which is a shame because the character seems cool. Like I was rewriting it while watching. I was really rooting for her to
As we do.
be like legit, and the movie was just kind of boring. Whereas I think Deadpool, obviously there was a fan base for Deadpool, and like people who know Deadpool love him. And from what I've read, this movie does a good job of capturing that character. So you already have
Mm.
this fun, charismatic, irreverent character that people love. and he has so much energy. And so like you already got like halfway there just with the character. And then
Mm-hmm.
to find writers, directors, the crew, the team, everybody behind it who's willing to invest what needs to be in this movie to make it great. I even read that Ryan Reynolds, he paid for some things out of his own pocket that the studio wasn't able to pay for, or the studio was
Mm-hmm.
unwilling to pay for. So it's things like that. Like people really seem to believe in Deadpool, and especially Ryan Reynolds seemed to believe in Deadpool and wanted this to be great. And not to say that the people behind Madam Web didn't believe in it. They obviously did
Mm-hmm.
their best, put in a lot of hard work, but I think they were unable to like weather issues in production as well as maybe
Mm-hmm.
Deadpool was. Uh, and the Deadpool character is just so fun. Like
Yep.
you're going to make a fun movie if it's about him and in the right
Yeah.
hands.
Mm. Yeah, and I think one thing that is also interesting about like his style of humor and who he is as a character is like this willingness to challenge the existing assumptions, the existing way of doing things, to the like grit and tenacity to go it on his own and carve his own path. I think that's something that like there was a clear vision for, and you see that trickle out into some of the humorous bits. Like I loved in the opening credits, there's written by, and it's colon, the real heroes here. And I'm like, wow, this was 2016. It's just fascinating given all of the writer strikes and stuff of late. But like even back then, there was this recognition of like, we're gonna call out the hard truths and we're unafraid to do that. And I think perhaps especially in the climate of the 2016 year and the years surrounding that, like there's maybe also that other pool that like pull that like drew people into this type of character who was willing to challenge the way that things have been done and had the confidence to go for it. And perhaps we feel that in the vision for this movie and who this character is, that then trickles out into the plot points, trickles out into the character moments, all of that we really can feel the difference.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of Deadpool is that this movie, in a lot of ways, is righting a previous wrong. So, in the Wolverine origin movie, we get to see Wade, and he's played by Ryan Reynolds. And from what I've read, I haven't read the Deadpool comics. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know a lot about this world, but from what I've read, they did him dirty in that movie, and
Mm-hmm.
they did not handle Wade as they should have. And so I feel like they almost had like a chip on their shoulder and was like, okay, we're going to make Deadpool just freaking awesome. And we're going to do justice to this character. And we're going to make it great because the studios have screwed this up before and we're not going to do that again. And so I think there was that like dedication to, we're going to make this right. And we're also at the same time going to make a damn good movie. So whether you are just a casual movie viewer or you're a comic book person, you should be pleased with this either way. And I feel like they did a really good job achieving that. And I can't help but wonder if that little chip on their shoulder really helped them nail this movie.
Yeah, yeah. The passion and the fire was there and fueled the dedication and the effort to make this what it is. Yeah, I love that. While we're on the topic of the X-Men pieces, I have to say, like, I have not followed any of the X-Men movies, and so all of the like plot points in this movie that integrated with those characters completely lost on me. I'm curious to know, have you seen a lot of those movies? Did you follow it? There's probably like all kinds of like emotional stakes and significance to some of those scenes, and I was like, great, some friends are here to help. We love it.
Yeah, I have seen the X-Men movies. I don't think I've seen all of them, but I've seen a majority of them. And what I really appreciate about how this was integrated into the X-Men universe is just all of the little references to it. Like obviously we get to see those two X-Men who come to help him, but I think what makes it really fun is you don't need to know who they are. You don't need to know who Colossus is or who, Negasonic Teenage whatever her name is, Wasteland or whatever it was. You don't need to know who they are.
Friends.
You just
Friends
need
have
to
arrived.
know, yeah, they are here. They are superheroes. They are trying to help him. You know, they want him on their team. Uh, yeah, I loved
That's it.
that
Yeah.
piece of it. But then I thought what was really funny is that they uh, they integrate all of these like references to all the movies. So like he
Mm,
makes fun of the X-Men movies. He says James McAvoy or Stewart, these timelines are so confusing because you have the prequels and then you have the non-prequels. So referencing the two actors who play Professor X, he's just like constantly making fun of all the X-Men, all of the Hugh Jackman references, who played Wolverine. So all
mm.
of those little things I thought were so smart and so funny. And because all of those little Easter eggs are so quick, if you don't get one, it's okay. We're already on to
Mhm.
the next joke, and you don't need to camp out there and wonder who he's referencing. So, again, I think that pace is really, really smart in us not getting hung up on a reference that we might not understand.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's something that Marvel in general, we've talked about on the pod, does an incredible job of it rewards those that are following along and do get every single one of the little details, and you get that glow of like, I'm in the know. And for those of us that don't, friends have showed up. They have different powers that we get to see unfold, and there's kind of an awareness of perhaps there's like a intersecting storyline here that may be significant, but it's not significant for this movie, which is I think what's key. Overall, we know that the main like central tension of this movie is Wade is fighting to get his life back, and he's got a big bad foe named Francis, and some people come along to help, but they're the backstory of the emotional stakes of whatever is in that other intersecting universe doesn't really have a strong influence on this central plot line, which I think really helps make this work. Otherwise, you get a little bit lost if there's something that felt like it should have been like a meaningful moment, and I'm like, context. Let me furiously Wikipedia this right now. They don't fall into that trap in this movie. So friends show up, they come to help. They've got some cool powers and make for some funny little moments as well, some little banter, and then we're off to the next scene.
Yeah, there's no time to pull out your phone and start searching Wikipedia because we're already on to the next thing.
Well, because then I would also need to read all of the Wikipedia threads about this entire other universe of the X-Men, which ain't nobody got time
It's
for
too
in the
big.
middle of the movie.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
too much.
Um, one thing. So we were talking a little bit about the humor in this film, and how it's like a significant part of Deadpool as a brand. One bit that I didn't remember or really like found kind of meaningful this time around was there was that whole, I mean, obviously there's that whole middle section of him getting tortured as he undergoes this transformation, and there's this small line that Francis says, which he says to Wade. He says, one thing that never survives this place is a sense of humor. And I thought that was such a perfect example of the way that this movie is wisecracking in a lot of ways, but there are certain moments where the humor and is a way to introduce like sentimentality. And so for Wade, we see that his humor is a big part of who he is, but there's this extra meaning and dimension to that iconic humor, which is his resilience, the way that he did not yield and get that snuffed out and stamped out of him while undergoing this insane experience of torture by this big bad guy. So I thought that carried a lot of like really great like emotional weight for the rest of the movie, where we get to see Deadpool still doing his like chatty, cracking jokes bit throughout, and you realize like, no, this is actually also symbolic of his resilience as well. It makes for some really good entertainment, but I love that the movie also added this little dose of sentimentality to the humor that is so distinctly him.
Yeah, the humor isn't there just for humor's sake, but it reveals something deeper about this character, and I love that it's almost this like rebellious part of him that's like, oh, you think that I'm not going to keep my humor? Okay, I'm going to humor even harder. Just watch me. And it's almost this like, okay, this is my life. My life is insane right now, and I'm going to process it through humor because that is what I have. And it's just so interesting how that is such a deep, deep part of him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it adds this extra like depth to this character trait that is really fun and makes for great entertainment, but there's extra weight to it, which is the perfect combination of things for this movie to have really nailed and hit home. So I thought that was really smart. They could have just had him be this wisecracking superhero and we would have been down. But to add that extra little oomph behind it, that extra depth of flavor, really makes this more meaningful. And I think also maybe like makes us also feel more connected to him as well. Because like we are rooting for his humor to stay and to endure amidst all of the craziness that he's going through in Francis's little experiment basement.
Well, and what I love is how the movie kind of plays with what's a joke and what's not. So early in the film, he is referencing his suit and he talks about the reason why it's red is because so like when he bleeds on it, you can't tell. And it's a funny line and it's like, "Oh, that's really funny, Wade." Like cool. But then you see in the flashback when he's finally making his suit, his first attempt is all white and then he bleeds all over it and then it's red. And so you realize what you maybe had thought was a joke in the beginning was actually true. And so I love the way that the movie does that to us and kind of shifts how we view certain things that Deadpool has said and recontextualizes them, and in some ways it makes it even funnier. And the movie is really, really smart in how it kind of bounces back and forth on some of those things.
hmm Yeah, yeah. No, that was a great bit, and I love that they also integrate that little character moment with his friend, the woman who's blind, living in the house with him. How she's the one who's like, "You gotta wear red, you dumbass." You know what I mean? Like, of course, it's this lady that is gonna be the one that gives him that little suggestion because Homegirl is a badass and probably been through so much, you know. And so that whole it also is very efficient in creating this like connection point between these two characters that we get to see in this like middle little section vignette of this character that's helped him along the way and been a part of his journey. So just the efficiency of the humor, I think, is also really really neat.
Yeah, it's so good and it's so spot on. And it's also fun to see how there are different types of humor littered throughout. And so I think that's another reason why it's so fun to watch is you get it's one of those like there's kind of something for everybody in this one where you get to see different types of humor, and whether you like physical humor or sarcasm or like all of these other things, there's some of that in here and you just see, you know, Deadpool is just a big jokester and you can see that coming out in all sorts of different ways depending on what context he's in.
Yeah, and it really I think helps him feel like a real human being and really relatable. One of the things that from the very opening sequence I thought like worked really well to just like get us to connect with this character is that whole opening shootout sequence on the bridge where Deadpool like misses two shots trying to get Francis on the motorcycle, and he
Mhm.
makes a whole bunch of jokes around that, and then he's counting his bullets, and he like I think takes an extra luxurious two more bullets to like shoot through somebody's head, and he's like three, two, stupid, you know, like so we see like this impulsiveness in him as well, where he's you know he's roasting himself, he's making fun of himself as he's trying to execute this insane mission. And so we've seen probably like so many superheroes that feel larger than life. And in a lot of ways, Deadpool's like a self-made man, you know, like he's made his own suit. He's totally new to this and figuring it out and learning his own powers, but also he's just a guy. He's just a normal guy who has got this rebellious streak, and this is what it could look like if a normal dude became a superhero and is figuring shit out. And I love that he immediately feels relatable to us. From the opening shootout sequence on the bridge, we feel like, hey, this is a dude that I know, and not this larger than life aspirational superhero that we often see, which there's a place for that like awe and wonder at these big characters that always make the best moral decisions every time. But there's something really comforting seeing someone like us on the screen just trying to figure his life out and get his life back in order.
And I think it's really smart that the film starts with him riding in a cab, like instead of riding on his super cool superhero jet, or like, I don't know, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
his cool motorcycle or the Batmobile or whatever. He is in a cab. Like, could there be anything more relatable? Um, and then I really loved that shootout sequence on the bridge, and also him just forgetting his gear all the time. Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Again, so relatable. How many times have we forgotten something that was really, really important that we needed? But so it's this really human trait that then sets up this really funny and fun action sequence, which is so smart. But that moment of, okay, I only have 12 bullets, and there's this like horde of dudes
Yeah.
coming at me, it immediately sets the stakes. There's something about a countdown that just immediately creates stakes and tension, and this movie capitalizes on that right away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the shots of like the bullets with their numbers on them, the close-ups, just them like
Mm-hmm.
clanking to the ground. It just really adds to the drama and this feeling big and juicy and dramatic in the ways that we show up to the movies for. I love all of that. But especially when he's only got like one bullet left, and then we get to see the other parts of his gear, which is his knives that he gets to whip out later on. So the way that the scene opens up even further, like we thought we understood the rules of this part, which is he's got 12 bullets, and now that he's gotten down to none, and Francis also has his unarmed, like now what? And that's always a fun thing in an action sequence when we think that they're backed into against a wall, and then we get to see them like maneuver their way or pull out their next tactic to continue to fight. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, the way that this movie levels up fights is, I think, interesting, because sometimes that can get a little bit boring, at least for me. I don't know, but I'm that person. By the third act of a superhero movie, I'm done and I'm ready to go home. But that didn't happen in this, which is great. And I think it has partially to do with how some of the fights are structured and paced, because it's not this like continual leveling up, but you'll like level up a couple of times and then you're done. Like, there's not this extended fight sequence. They're not just like pulling out weapons from everywhere. Like, it's not continuing to go on forever. The fight very much has a beginning, middle, and end. And the way that some of these fights end, particularly the first one, is just so humorous too. And I think that infusion of humor helps make these even more enjoyable to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've definitely switched roles in this movie, because by the ending action sequence of this movie, I was definitely like, oh my gosh, this is not keeping me engaged as much anymore. Which I was wondering while watching this movie. I'm like, is this yet another data point for Sarah in I'm watching an MCU movie and this is the third act ending sequence, and I'm done. I'm over it. I had a great time. Let's get to the ending credits. Like, it sounds like you didn't feel that way with this movie.
No, this one performed
Oh,
better
amazing.
than a lot of the MCU movies.
Wow. Good job, Deadpool. Look at
Good
that.
job,
Look at
Deadpool.
that.
Way to
Yeah.
go.
One thing that I did appreciate in that ending fight scene is the way that the score contributes to the mood and the tone and the humor, but also heightens the action sequence. So there's this whole, I forget which song it is. It's some like sentimental lovey-dovey, like we're lovers being reunited song that's playing when Deadpool's finally reunited with his girl, and that song continues to play as they start to fight again. But after a while, the keys start to get a little twisted and wonky, and then we fully like fade out of that song and we're full in like, traditional action sequence score. And so it was really cool to see the way that the fight scene first creates this dissonance. Yay, we're reunited with the person that we love, da, 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 da. And then it starts to get to like, oh no, we actually still need to fight now, and this is some serious business. And so the way that the score helps us like transition that starts with a juxtaposition. We transition with this like funky uh like key tuning bit, and then we fully drop out that score and usher in the traditional like dramatic fight scene sequence score. And I thought that that whole transition made for a lot of fun. It's something fresh, something different, and I think it also fit for the way that maybe what Deadpool's feeling and experiencing of like, I'm so excited to be reunited with this girl that I've loved so much, but also, oh crap, we got to go fight some bad guys now.
Yeah, I think that was by Chicago, and I was jamming. I was like, yes, some Chicago, let's go. And then like it got all dissonant and like superhero-y. I was like, oh, okay, we're done with my trip down memory lane. Okay. But I think that points to another thing that I think this movie does really well in it's strategic in its pop culture references. And a lot of Deadpool's references are to the 80s, which I think in some ways almost makes this movie more timeless. Like he's either making an 80s reference or like making fun of superheroes or making fun of the movie making industry. And all of those I feel like have a long shelf life. And even though this is just littered with pop culture references, I think it's going to continue to age well because what it referenced was already a little bit older by the time this came out. And so if you listen to 80s music, if you know Chicago or Wham or George Michael or all of these other, artists that he referenced or music that plays, then you're going to have a great time and it's so fun. But if you don't know it, then it's no big deal, and it's just part of who Deadpool is. Because sometimes movies, if it makes too many pop culture references or doesn't weave them in super well, it can kind of age the movie. And I feel like Deadpool does a good job in what it references to make it more timeless. That could have gone really wrong had they maybe made some other choices, but I feel like Deadpool just nailed that aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes this happens in movies too, where they're making jokes that might have been relevant at the time, where when the movie was being written or created, and then by the time it comes out, like months later, they already kind of feel dated. You know what I mean? So this movie doesn't fall into that trap. But I remember in Deadpool 2, especially, there being a lot more. Perhaps maybe this is just my memory and it just stood out to me more, but a lot more references that are making fun of the movie industry. And I'm fascinated to rewatch those and see how those have held up, given all of the things that have been happening in the movie industry since then. So I think that'll be really fascinating. But the one that really like stood out to me that was like, that's some really great foreshadowing, is the one in the opening credit scene with the written by colon the real heroes here. I just thought that was like really neat. This film coming out in 2016 is continuing to celebrate the role of writers, and especially I think in a movie like this too, where the writing is so key and the dialogue and the banter and the humor is on full display to shine. Just the way that that little bit aged perfectly, like perfectly in line with the things that have been happening recently in the film industry, and really acknowledging and advocating for the rights for writers of film and TV. And so that bit is spot on, and it'll be fascinating to watch Deadpool 2 to see what else continues to be spot on, or perhaps have aged differently over time.
Yeah, I read that the studio wouldn't pay the writers for their onset contributions during the movie. So that was one of the instances
Wow.
when Ryan Reynolds paid the writers for those.
Wow.
So I'm
Hmm.
assuming that's true. I like to believe that that's true. And I think it just shows what you were just saying, that value that is placed on writers and how studios don't always appreciate what writers bring, but when somebody recognizes that, when a studio recognizes it, when a producer recognizes it, and they invest in the writers, then great things are produced. So basically, studios, don't be cheap. Pay your writers well. It's not hard,
Yes,
okay? You want a
please.
good
Yes,
movie,
please.
pay your writers well. It's that simple. I mean, it's not that simple. There are other factors, but it's a starting point.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating to like think about, a lot of the things that we've talked about in our conversation today around the storytelling structure of this film, going back, cutting back and forth in time, and how that really added to the momentum of this film. We've obviously praised and talked a ton about the different styles and flavors of humor that are littered throughout this. Some of the character moments for who this person and this character is, what makes him iconic, adding that emotional depth to some of the things that could have been just really fun, but also have now this added dimension. All of those are in a huge part to the writing behind them, to bring them to life, to know when they are perfectly timed and paced. All of that goodness really originates from it being envisioned in the writer's room. So yeah, it's neat to see the way that our conversation also reflected that as well, of some of the things that work so well in this movie.
Yes, we love good
Mm-hmm.
screenwriters. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
we want to celebrate quality writing always.
Yep.
And this movie
Yep.
has that.
Agreed. Agreed. Other aspects of Deadpool that really stood out to you that we wanted to mention before we wrap up.
I think just some other of the references that I loved. So one of my favorite bits is when he is arguing with his roommate about IKEA, and she's attempting to put an IKEA furniture set together, which is hilarious in and of itself. So good, so funny. But it's also, going back to what we talked about earlier, so relatable. Anybody who has put together an IKEA piece of furniture knows exactly how that feels. And so one of those moments of like, this is so relatable. This is such a bonkers movie with all these crazy situations that I would never show up in. But I have put together multiple pieces of IKEA furniture. It's a whole vibe, and this movie reflects that beautifully.
Yes. Particularly when it all falls apart and the collapsing into your other piece of furniture from
Yeah.
sheer exhaustion. To be like, I don't know, I give up, I just need a minute to relax into my other furniture of choice, that somehow I've put together. But yes, that feeling of defeat and just I give up. This is for a tomorrow thing to tackle again. So good. I felt that so hard.
It's so relatable. We've all been there.
It's great. It's really great. Some other things that I just like silly things. One of my hot takes is they talk about throughout this movie that like he looks so terrible and oh my gosh, he's never going to be loved again and all this kind of stuff. And like we know Ryan Reynolds with his shining beautiful tan puppy dog face. We've seen it, all over our big screens. But like my hot take is like I don't think he looks that bad. Like he's looking rough, but he just looks a little older and wrinkly. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is just what Ryan Reynolds might look like when he's like 95 years old and skin is not going so great, So that whole bit, I was like, every time he was on screen, he was like, I just look terrible. I'm like, I really, you look better than you feel like you do. But this could be a me thing. This could be my hot take.
No, I agree. I didn't think that he looked that bad. So I read it as he sees himself worse than he actually looks like. And you can like that is a function
Yeah.
almost of his insecurity. So like even when everybody is looking at him when he's walking down the street.
Yeah.
I don't know that they ever say what city they're in, but I was just imagining New York.
New
And
York.
I'm like,
Yes.
okay, if you're walking down the street in New York looking like a slightly burnt up Ryan Reynolds, you are not going to be noticed in that sea of people. No one is looking at you. But
Nope.
I just imagined that as his own insecurity. And maybe people weren't looking at him, but he imagined that they were. Or maybe people were looking like past him at something else, but he thought that they were looking at him, and he saw himself as a hideous creature. And so that just kind of I don't know, took over his whole life. So that's how I read it, to kind of make
Mm,
sense of that
that's good
dissonance
headcanon.
that I saw.
That's good headcanon. I like that. Because that headcanon is also very relatable too. You know what I mean? Everyone's had a
Mm-hmm.
pimple in like the smack dab middle of their forehead and feel like
Mm-hmm.
the
Yep.
entire world is staring at it with a magnifying glass. So
Absolutely.
that feeling of being looked at. Yeah. I like that. That's a good interpretation. Because the whole time I'm like, bro, you don't really look that bad. You're fine. You're good.
But then Vanessa took him back. So maybe now, like, obviously, like, that would take an adjustment for everybody. But after her adjustment period, you know, maybe he will also start to feel better about himself because
Yeah, which
she still loves him.
yeah, one of the things that I mean, I don't remember the plot of Deadpool 2 at all, but I was like, I wonder how I wonder how they like what where they're gonna go with this next. So that was kind of a fun little curiosity at the end there. It always I mean it's always like makes for a standard like forcing function for a hero to go on an adventure when like someone is gone, someone that you love is gone, and then you have to go find her or get them back. So I just it was fun to think about like where because he's in his full suit again doing his Deadpool thing in Deadpool 2. So what is the forcing function for that for the next movie? I don't know. I don't remember at all. I remember
Yeah.
the vibe of that movie. Nothing about the
Mm-hmm.
plot.
Yeah. I remember the experience of watching that
Yeah.
movie. And I remember, I think it's Zazie Beetz who's in it.
Mm.
And I think is it the kid from that one Taika movie that I didn't like that everybody loves?
Oh, Hunt for
Um,
the Wilder People.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
forget
yeah.
what the actor's name is, but yes, that
I
really
think
adorable
he's
kid.
in it too, if I'm remembering correctly, but I
Okay.
might be remembering wrong. I don't know. So
Mm-hmm.
that's all I have to contribute to this is I remember where I was watching and I remember a couple of the actors in it. And
Wow, that's
that's all I
impressive.
have for you. So this is
Great.
going to be fun.
This is good. It's good to go into our next movie real on a real white canvas. So
Yeah.
that'll be fun. Cool. Okay. Any other last things that we wanted to mention before we wrap?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Faulty Towers. There is a Faulty Towers reference in this movie, which I just loved. So Faulty
Oh,
Towers is a British TV show. It is young John Cleese, and it is very silly. And I love Faulty Towers. It's
wow.
very, very silly. Just it's John Cleese, so you know what you're getting into. But it was just lovely to find a Faulty Towers reference in amidst this movie.
When does that one happen? That one went over
Um,
my head.
I don't super remember, but he says Basil Faulty, and he said
Uh,
Basil Faulty, and I was like, oh, Faulty Towers. So like it's in like
yeah.
a list of names. I don't
Okay, got
remember
it.
exactly when it was,
Somewhere,
but
somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, I have it in my
I mean,
notes
there's
of a
constant
Faulty
dialogue
Towers
being
reference.
flung at us. So
Yeah,
nice, nice. The little spark of joy that you got to have for
oh,
that little
it's
reference.
great.
I love it.
That's why I
Collected into your
love.
Easter basket.
Yeah, I love movies like this that are just all Easter
You really
eggs
do.
because you can just
Mm-hmm.
find such fun stuff. And there's a bunch of them in here that are so fun, but that was probably my favorite because nobody references Faulty Towers. So it was great to see.
I have noticed that you do love movies or shows that you get to collect your little basket of goodies.
I do. I
Special joy that you
consume
get.
a lot of TV and movies. And so I like it when TV and movies respect that I have consumed a lot of content and are like, okay, I'm going to make this fun for you. Like, thank you.
We will reward you. Yes.
Yes.
This is like when Caitlin, our resident MCU movie expert guest fan, comes on and she's like, this one little thing that
Mm-hmm.
referenced this one thing from Hawkeye's past that happened 20 years ago in his past. And you're like, amazing. I love this moment for you. I feel the joy. I feel the joy.
Yes. Yeah. So good.
Great. Love it. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of Deadpool. You can find it available on Max to stream. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Deadpool. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at moviesandUsPod, or you can email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss, no surprise to anyone, the film Deadpool 2, continuing on our most fun homework assignment as we anticipate the Deadpool 3 coming out in July. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.